Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Meyer and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to present HJR38, a proposed constitutional amendment that will prohibit the Texas legislature from imposing a carbon tax. This resolution is a proactive measure to protect our economy, our energy industry, and the hardworking people of Texas from burdensome taxation that could stifle economic growth and increase the cost of living. As we all know, God has blessed the great state of Texas with tremendous reserves of hydrocarbons, and consequently, Texas has been a global leader in energy production, both directly and indirectly providing positive impacts on the Texas economy. And in fact, it would be safe to say that there would be no Texas miracle without it. The oil and gas industry contributes $160 billion annually to the Texas economy, making up nearly 8% of the state's GDP, nearly 10% of state revenues, and employs almost 500,000 Texans, with many more in support roles. Additionally, Texas leads the nation in oil and gas production, supplying more than 40% of the nation's crude oil and 29% of its natural gas. As we know, no state in the U.S. has implemented a direct carbon tax, but some, like California, have introduced cap-and-trade programs that function as a tax on emissions. Meanwhile, in European countries, carbon taxes have led to higher energy costs, economic slowdowns, and geopolitical vulnerabilities, as seen with the region's dependence on Russian energy. Texas must not follow that path. HJR 138 is straightforward. It amends Article 8 of the Texas Constitution by adding Section 26, which explicitly bans the state from imposing a tax on carbon content in fuel or emissions from goods and services. This means no government-imposed penalties on energy production, manufacturing, or daily activities that involve carbon-based fuels. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I yield for witness testimony and reserve my right to close.
Members, any questions? Representative Alders, is this your first bill layout?
It is.
Oh, very good. Congratulations. Welcome
Thank
to
you.
Ways and Means. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Chair calls Carr Ingham and Samantha Vick.
Which side do you want?
Okay, I'll take it.
All right. You are Samantha Vick. You are with Heartland Impact, and you are here testifying for the bill. Is that
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, Chairman Meyer, members of the committee, thank you for having me here today. I am the Senior State Manager for Government Relations at Heartland Impact. Ultimately, prohibiting the imposition of a carbon tax would provide a protection for all Texans from a tax policy that would ultimately cost consumers more. The impact of a carbon tax would raise the price of coal, natural gas, and gasoline enough to make them more expensive than their industry counterparts that would not be subject to a carbon tax. When this happens, Texas consumers will have two options. First, they can begin utilizing wind and solar at greater rates than they do, although these forms of energy are intrinsically much more expensive at their current technological developments. Or secondly, they can continue to utilize coal, natural gas, and gasoline at more expensive rates than before, because what energy producers and companies will do is pass down these tax rates to consumers through pricing. Ultimately, consumers will be forced to spend more money on energy. Meanwhile, Texas energy prices have increased 20% over the last 5 years. This is also the prohibition of a carbon tax is also paramount for all of the 422,000 Texans employed in the oil and gas production industry. Not only would these hardworking Texans have their jobs disproportionately affected by a carbon tax, but they'd also still have to pay the higher rates for their energy bills at home. Moreover, this comes at a time when energy and grid reliability is more important than ever. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, electricity demand is expected to grow 15% in the next 5 years. Ultimately, utilizing the domestic sources of energy that Texas is blessed with without cumbersome and counterintuitive carbon tax is a path to ensuring more reliable and affordable energy for Texans while continuing to promote a Texas-first economic and energy policy. I have a myriad of studies that corroborate a lot of these that I'll be sending to y'all later on today that just show the downstream effects of carbon taxes in other states and large studies where it's done federally. Thank you for your time.
Members, any questions? Oh, yes, Chair recognizes Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. You're registered representing Heartland Impact?
Yes, sir.
What is that?
We are, Heartland Impact is the 501c4 arm of the Heartland Institute. The Heartland Institute is a 40-year-old national nonprofit. We primarily focus on the energy space.
Okay, and you're based in Illinois?
Yes, but I am actually a Texan, very happy to be home.
Oh, okay, very good. Well, welcome home. I appreciate your testimony. We've had a number of proposals like this this session. I'm sure we'll see some more to, sort of preemptively ban or prohibit a certain type of tax that, to my knowledge, no one has ever proposed in the Texas legislature. I don't think there's a proposal this session to institute a carbon tax. If anyone in the future did propose that, which I doubt, but if they did, that would be a bill that would have to go through the legislative process, and we'd have a hearing on it like this, and you could come and testify against it and lobby members against it. Why is it necessary to proactively or preemptively put something in our state constitution, which already has, it's a mess. It's got hundreds and hundreds of amendments on it already. Why is it necessary to do that when, if someone ever did bring a proposal like this in the future, it could be debated on its merits and, potentially voted down on its merits?
That's a great question, Representative Turner. Thank you. Ultimately, my personal belief is that creating a constitutional amendment like this allows all of the constituents to sound off in the preceding election that would happen. So inherently in this function, you can include the citizens in a way that they perhaps wouldn't be if it's just a bill moving through the legislature and they can sound off more. I do understand your concern about perhaps making the Constitution more regulatory than it may need to be preemptively. But we see a lot of these programs jumping up in a lot of states with, as I mentioned earlier, negative downstream effects. So I guess it's just being on the defense for this one. And that's for all of you to decide if that's particularly relevant at this time.
Okay, well, I appreciate you being frank about that. So the bill author said in his layout that, if I understood him correctly, that no states to date have adopted a carbon tax. Is that?
No, many states have. There's 8 right now. They're mostly on the seaboards. They're also
That have
called
actually instituted one?
instituted them, yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
I can pull up my map, but off the top of my head, it's basically all of New England and Washington and Oregon. Alaska has one. They have an interesting program where they actually return some of their tax rebates to their constituents and the way that they function. It's a specific royalty program that only really works with the way that Alaska pulls their energy resources, and they're a very energy resource rich state, much like Texas is. And as you know, when you compare one state to one state, it's always apples to oranges. But there are states. There has not been one successfully in Texas, I believe.
Hey, okay, well, that's good to know. Have you ever seen one that is, so when they do institute a carbon tax in those states, has it been just across the board on any type of energy that produces carbon, or have you seen them that are specific to a type of fuel source? Because you mentioned several different fuel sources.
Yes, sir.
What have you seen out there?
Most of them tend to target natural gas, coal, and oil. They can also have additional taxes levied for fuel taxes, so make that even more onerous than it is. Ultimately, what the take is that it seems to want to promote the alternatives in the industry, which would be wind, solar, and electric vehicles.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Very good, thank you, Ms. Vick. You are Carr Ingham. You are here on behalf of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers, and you are here testifying for the bill. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Very good.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Chairman Meyer, good to see you, all the members of the committee. Good to see you. Representative Alders, good to see you for your first layout. You picked a good one. I struggled a bit with how to approach this. I mean, I could spend 3 or 4 hours talking about why a carbon tax imposed anywhere is a bad idea, especially in the U.S. Only is a bad idea, and Texas only is a worse idea even than that yet. So I don't have 3 or 4 hours, and you don't want to listen to me for that long, but I'll hit the highlights on that. First of all, there's no question about this. It's highly regressive in nature. Everybody understands this. It hits low-income households, individuals, and families the most. The same for small businesses, and if you're in Texas and you're a smaller independent oil and gas operator, anything that imposes costs on the industry hits that group of companies harder than it hits larger companies. Its negative impacts are widely distributed across the economy just because energy is filtered throughout our economy. It is in virtually everything that we do all day, every day, and affects virtually every aspect of economic life. Raising the cost of energy raises the cost of virtually everything else that we do in life. It's really subjective in nature. What's the correct price for carbon? What's this based on, and who decides? Is it this notion of the social cost of carbon? Well, maybe, but that's highly subjective as well. We know this because it varies widely from one political administration to the next. And even those that are assumed to be the least biased still have considerable variation. It's impossible, frankly, to scrub the bias out of that. It's anti-free market, it's anti-personal freedom and economic liberty, and it's anti-innovation. It keeps us from solving problems in the future that we historically have let markets solve. And perhaps worst of all, it's ineffective, particularly measured against the trade-offs that are involved with the imposition of a carbon tax. The economic pain inflicted dwarfs any environmental or climate benefit. So, even should, though, the decision be made that a carbon tax is advisable, for one reason or another, it's inadvisable to impose a carbon tax in, say, the U.S. and the U.S. alone without bringing other countries along. And I would say the offending countries around the world in terms of CO2 emissions. The U.S. over the last 20 to 25 years has steadily and impressively decreased CO2 emissions in terms of the absolute total, in terms of the per capita total, and in terms of the U.S.'s share of global CO2 emissions. And I mean, those numbers are low, and especially that last one. And so it makes no sense to inflict this economic pain on the U.S., where we are the problem solver, not the problem causer. And the way around this, presumably, is to impose a border adjustment or some other administrative nightmare of a thing where you're still raising costs across the board to U.S. consumers. So even if you think it's advisable to do it in the U.S., it's utterly ill-advised to do it in Texas alone. Why? Because you get no benefit from this. You impose economic pain on the greatest energy-producing state this nation has or ever will see, as Representative Alders pointed out. I'll just hit the highlights on these numbers. I mean, not that long ago, 15 years ago or so, we were producing 1 million barrels of crude oil a day in Texas. That number's sniffing 6 million barrels a day now. We were at that time producing about 20% of the nation's crude oil, which is impressive enough. Now that number's about 43%. The U.S., led by Texas, has achieved this thing that we always said we wanted: a long-term, abundant, and affordable supply of domestic petroleum energy for literally decades to come. And so, again, to impose this tax in Texas and Texas alone would be especially ill-advised. And I don't see it coming. I hope that it doesn't. But I think a carbon tax, a tax on energy to both producers and consumers, rises to a particular kind of level of evil in terms of taxation. It looks more like an income tax than it does a consumption tax on a particular product. Why? Because, again, it hits virtually every aspect of economic life. And so this may be the answer to the question. I'll let you all wrestle with that, and we'll do so if we should have such a thing in the future. But and we, the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers, a statewide organization of people involved in the production of crude oil and natural gas that have accomplished all of these things on behalf of the American people and increasingly people elsewhere around the world in clean fashion. Us producing this and sending to others makes the world cleaner as well, not just the U.S. and Texas. So again, I could keep going on about this for a while, but thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify today.
Very good. Thanks, sir. Members, any questions? I guess Chair recognizes Representative Troxler.
So we heard the response about other states, but what about other countries, major oil and gas producing countries in OPEC? Do they have carbon tax?
They do not have a carbon tax. They have nothing like a carbon tax,
Okay.
and I'm not suggesting that I want them to.
No, of course not.
But I want them, I want the recognition to be there. First of all, we've eclipsed every one of them in terms of our crude oil production. The U.S. has overtaken every OPEC country as well as Russia as the top producer of crude oil on the planet.
And so if we do this, there's going to be, it'd basically be an opposite incentive, right? It would push those companies to
that's
produce
exactly
more
what
product
happens.
in
Unless
a-
you somehow manage to diminish the demand for what we want and use all day, every day, the less of it that is produced here, the more of it is produced in countries that do it in much less clean fashion. It makes us, it's anti-competitive for the U.S., and frankly, it would be anti-competitive for the state of Texas.
Well, and I was curious specifically about the environmental piece. We're producing oil and gas in a much cleaner way than other countries are doing it. So imposing this tax ultimately would push more countries who are doing this in a less clean way to produce more, which is I think the opposite of what we all want, right? We want cheap oil and gas and products and good paying jobs and protect the environment at the same time. And imposing a carbon tax would do the opposite.
That's exactly what it would do. And by the way, we've done all of this at the same time. At the same time, these emissions in the U.S. have come down, and I mean come down spectacularly. And this data is not in dispute, by the way. We have increased the production and consumption of petroleum products in the U.S. dramatically. It just exploded. So we really do have the best of both worlds, and I wish we could do more to recognize that.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Very good. Thank y'all both.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on, for, or against House Joint Resolution 138? Seeing none, the chair recognizes Representative Alders to close on House Joint Resolution 138.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a common sense bill. I think that we recognize the value of the energy industry to the state of Texas. We recognize that the state of Texas and the U.S. are focused on producing energy in the most efficient and clean way possible, and this is an assurance that the state of Texas is going to continue to be effective and the economic powerhouse that it's been. And so I'm happy to answer any other questions. Otherwise, I close.
Members, any other questions? Yes, chair recognizes Representative Gervin Hawkins.
Representative, this is your first bill?
Yes, ma'am.
And so have you created a solution looking for a problem?
I hope not.
You know, when we talk about carbon, everybody don't understand what that's all about. Could you
Right.
give us a little idea of you know, so we can understand is it carbon or barbon?
Well, you're referring to the emissions that we have when we produce and utilize fuel. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, I thought it was the emissions when you have a raggedy car and you know how you get that smoke.
It's
coming out
got
the
that
back?
too.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chair Vasu.
I noticed in your constitutional amendment here, it's talking about the emission of carbon dioxide, which we talked a lot about carbon tax. And it says, or other greenhouse gas. What are some examples of greenhouse gases?
Methane.
Uh-huh. Anything else?
I'd have to refer to the scientists in the room.
Fair answer. You know, we were thinking earlier, I think the testimony was, you know, why do this as a constitutional amendment now, as opposed to waiting for something to get proposed down the line? What would you say to that?
I think it's a testimony to the success of the Texas economy that we are a relatively low tax state, and we've seen the impact of our low tax burden as our states continue to grow. And I think making sure that we position ourselves as a state to ensure our businesses, our citizens, and companies around the country and even around the world that we are focused on remaining that way, I think is important to the continued success of our economy. And I think this bill falls in line with that. We have the incredible natural resources across our state, and allowing companies to know we're going to continue to support the exploration and production of those natural resources is an important indicator for our future success.
Absolutely. You mentioned natural resources. You know, Texas is a leading oil and gas producer, right? And we're leading in cattle production, right? Both sources of greenhouse emissions, right? So this is a pretty pro-Texan bill, right, you'd say?
Absolutely.
You know, in order to enact a carbon tax through the legislature right now, you'd only need 76 votes in the House, 16 votes in the Senate, and the lieutenant governor asleep, and the governor out of the state, right? So that's all you'd have to do. But if you amend the Constitution like this, what does that threshold go up to? It goes up to about 100 votes in the House.
Correct.
And 21, 22 votes in the Senate. Is that kind of makes it even more difficult to do this policy in the future, right?
We want to raise the hurdle and make sure that by instituting this ban, Texas is going to be more free.
Have you heard any of or seen any of the news articles about the carbon tax that they have in Canada and how that has impacted the people there?
A little bit. I haven't studied it deeply, but I know that generally speaking, it's been a discouragement on the energy industry.
I can tell you, Justin Trudeau's no longer the Prime Minister of Canada.
Correct.
That may or may not have something to do with that. Would it surprise you, the last little thing, I was looking up here with your testimony, your witnesses, would it surprise you to learn that the United States has reduced greenhouse gas emissions as a percentage by a greater amount than Canada without a carbon tax?
Free market's amazing, isn't it?
That's right. Thank you very much. Good bill.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? All right. Oh, yes, Chair recognizes Representative Troxclair.
When you were a little boy, did you one day dream of having a bill filed and speaking in front of committee about carbon taxes?
You know, I was working with cows in a different way, so.
Do you think your wife and your two kids who are sitting behind you think they're proud of you?
I hope so.
Oh, okay. Congrats on your first bill.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Noble.
All right, so your first bill, how do you explain this fiscal note of $191,689 for publication?
I want to know where they're getting their ink and paper, because that's a crazy cost for the cost of production.
Do you know why they put that on there?
I assume it's just the printing. I would defer to you senior members to tell me why it costs that much.
I think they put that on every bill that has
That's what
goes
I've
in a
understood.
constitutional amendment.
That's what I've understood.
Okay, great. Congratulations on your first bill.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? All right, thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
If there's no objection, House Joint Resolution 138 will be left pending. Is there objection?